Hello and welcome to Dialogue. One of the biggest stories from the recent G20 summit is the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC. Analysts say the massive rail and port deal is presented as a counter to the Belt and Road Initiative. While skipping the East Asia Summit, U.S. President Joe Biden lost no time to visit Vietnam, where the two countries upgraded their bilateral relations to a new level. What are the economic and geopolitical implications of the rail and shipping corridor? How have Biden's latest moves reflected his Asia strategy? Will Vietnam become a pawn of the U.S. against China? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined by Professor Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, Professor Rosario Malindog-Uy, Senior Research Fellow of the Global Governance Institution, and Hussein Askary, Vice Chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qianduo. Welcome to Dialogue. John, I will start with you. On the sidelines of the G20 summit, there's an announcement about this multinational rail and shipping project linking India, the Middle Eastern countries, and Europe. With probably the building of rail and ports in the next years or next decades. We don't know yet. Not many details are out right now. So tell us, what's your understanding of this, let's say, mega project here?
Well, first, let me start by saying that infrastructure and connectivity are always good. I wish them success, of course. This is also from China's perspective. These projects like this, is grandiose in the infrastructure projects are supposed to be open and inclusive. And if it is indeed realized, that's great for the people who are being affected by this. However, having said that, let's do a reality check, however. First of all, the first question I want to ask is that if you look at the map of this project, it involves one country. There's not even a signatory party to this deal. That is Jordan. How can you make a railway connection from Israel to Saudi Arabia without involving Jordan, right? I mean, it's like saying, India builds a railway to Mongolia without China approving this or even without China knowing this. This sounds like crazy. And I think if you look at the signatories of this memorandum of understanding, this is from the White House press release, clearly Jordan's not involved at all. I think it represents a little bit of arrogance and a condescending attitudes towards a sovereign country. You're building a railway over a country without even, they sanctify it or at least knowing about it, right? The second thing I want to say is that it's a big pie in the sky in my view. In consideration of the huge technological hurdles and huge financial risks associated with it. I mean, this railway traverses through the most difficult terrains for a railway in places in Saudi Arabia and UAE. People, have an understanding of the railway that China actually built for Saudi Arabia, what's called the Pilgrimage Railway, connecting Riyadh and I think it's Mecca, right? It's very, very difficult and it's extremely expensive. So I think, who's going to build it? I think most of the countries that have signed this memorandum of understanding haven't built a railway in the last 40 years. So, it's a huge technological issue that I'm raising here, as well as a financial issue. So in my view, I think it's more like a, PR campaign. There might be some geopolitical, geostrategic benefits that Washington can reap from this. But other than that, I think it's a big pie in the sky. It's not going to be realized in maybe the next decade. I wish it would happen, but honestly, I think it's vaporware at this point.
So a lot of questions surrounding this, let's say, potential project over there. Anna, from your point of view, what do you think is the purpose for this economic corridor?
For me, I think the IMEC is quite another initiative probably being orchestrated or being proposed by the United States. Basically, I would agree that it's one thing. It's for to counter the Belt and Road Initiative, which is very successful at the moment. But one thing that I can see in terms of challenge and how to put this forward and how really to implement it, because it's one thing to say that, we have IMEC, but it's another thing to say that we need to implement this, is financial challenge. As you can see, one of the strongest proponent of this would be Washington or the United States. So I think one of the responsibility that Washington or the United States should do is to put forward finances. But if you look at the current status or the current condition of the economy of the US, if you really look at it and examine it thoroughly, it's in recession. So I am not sure how the United States, being the strong proponent of this IMEC, would push through with it, and in what way it would assure all of these countries that are quite enthusiastic to be part of IMEC will be more confident to be part of this, and how would it attract more attention? Because at the end of the day, you propose something, at the end of the day you need finances for it. So I think that's one of the biggest challenge for this IMEC to fly, and I don't know how they're gonna do it.
Well, Hussein Askary, from your point of view, why it is the U.S. that probably most passionate about such a project?
Yes, well, I agree with the other guests. This is a geopolitical empty shell, like Build Back Better World and the Global Gateway. There is no substance to it because this is simply geopolitics. It has very little to do with economics, which I can come to. But the issue is that what this project is, like the other US proposed projects, are exclusive. You create a club of nations who you think you have converging interests against someone else. The Belt and Road Initiative is all inclusive. It includes everyone, even the United States is welcome into the Belt and Road. The other issue is that the Belt and Road Initiative is a win-win cooperation project. This and other projects are, in the mind of the Biden administration, is a geopolitical zero-sum game. It will never work. I will come to the reasons. The Belt and Road Initiative is a potent initiative. The others are impotent because China builds things. And all the nations mentioned in this project, if you come to Europe, China has developed the Piraeus port in Greece. It's one of the greatest endeavors in the Mediterranean. It's building railways to Serbia and Hungary to connect Greece to the heart of Europe. It's Chinese companies. In Israel, China built a container terminal in the port of Haifa, which is being talked about here, and in the port of Ashdod. China built and developed these ports. Yes, the billionaire from India, Adani, he bought part of that with cash, which is doubtful where it comes from, in the privatization process. China is building the Emirate rail network. The Chinese company CRRC is participating in building the rail, although the locomotives are bought from the United States, from a subsidiary of Caterpillar, which is good. It's good for everyone. Saudi Arabia is negotiating with China to build the Saudi land bridge, which will connect the Gulf region of Saudi Arabia to the west coast of Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. So to assume that in the Biden administration, this is people who don't have their feet in reality. They are in the clouds. China and the Belt and Road have their feet in reality. As the professor said, this is a pie in the sky, but it's not. It is a real project, but China is building it in partnership with the Emirates, with Saudi Arabia and others. India, unfortunately, is being pulled into a different sphere away from China. This is the only purpose of this whole undertaking. There is no substance behind it. There is no financing. If the United States was serious, they should build their own railway and port and infrastructure network, which is collapsing. Mm-hmm. In Europe, we have a similar problem with financing and building infrastructure. So how come we could build these things in other parts of the world? China is building that in cooperation with these nations. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are very happy with that cooperation, but they're open for European and American investments too. So there's a big difference between reality and what people in the Biden administration and the EU fantasize about.
Well, Professor Askary, you mentioned about the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is open to basically every country as long as they are happy to be part of that. What about this new proposed economic corridor? Is there any possibility? Let's assume they will go into, in fact, sometime in the future. Is it possible for Chinese participation, for Chinese companies, for example, to bid for certain product there? Professor Hussein Askary.
Sorry, for China, yes, of course. As I mentioned, China is actively working with all these nations, with the Europeans, with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, with the Emirates. I mean, even in India, there are big Chinese investments. So there are great opportunities for China, but this is in the framework of the Belt and Road. It cannot be part of this geopolitical game. Exclusive clubs, military alliances, and nations are realizing more and more now that the method embedded in the Belt and Road Initiative, in the BRICS group of nations. I mean, I understand President Xi Jinping just comes out of a wonderful BRICS Plus summit where a new garden, so to speak, is being planted by many nations, a colorful garden. Why should he go to an overcrowded apartment where drunk people are quarreling? You know, this is the difference. We have two systems here walking in different directions. And the one which is closest to reality and to achieving positive results on the ground is the Belt and Road Initiative, because it's giving results. There are concrete projects, things are being built, development is being brought, technology is being transferred, investments are made by China without much talk. You know, China can
Anna,
put its money where its mouth is.
Right. Let me turn to Anna. Professor, you know, if you look at the track record, which is not that sound, let's say, you know, global gateway announced by the European Union, or the Blue Dot Network by the U.S. Department, U.S. Department, and also the U.S. I think the G7, announced this B3W, like Build Back Better World. So after the announcement, there's a little taking place. What went wrong?
I think there are a lot of proposed some kind of grand project that the United States and the Western Alliance are trying to speak about. And sometimes when they have meeting like G7, G20, they come up with these things. But the problem with them is the follow through and also the planning. It's not really well conceptualized, well planned, and also the financing is not ready. Unlike the Belt and Road Initiative that you can see that from the time that it was conceptualized in 2013, even before the implementation, there's a well thought plan, and the funding is there, and the commitment coming from China is solid. So that's why it attracts a lot of participants. And imagine 50 countries and more than 100 plus organizations are part of the BRI, and until now it's one of the biggest projects thus far in the world that is successful, and it's really contributing to the poverty alleviation of countries that are part of it, and also the connectivity between different continents, and it produces fruits. And it's not only about hard infrastructure, it's also about soft infrastructure. So the difference is the concrete planning, the commitment is there for Belt and Road Initiative. But for this IMEC or some kind of Build Back Better of the United States, it's always like a buzzword, but it's like an air. It's like a balloon that is, that when you poke a little and it just explodes, and it's all air. So I think that's the lesson that many countries in the global south are learning. When you talk about the United States proposing something, there's that kind of ambivalence. And also, in most cases, these are geopolitical plan, or scheme, and they always kind of isolate isolate China or other countries like Russia. It's not as inclusive. So that's why the Belt and Road is a game changer for the global south or the developing economies, precisely because of the fact that it is inclusive. Everyone is welcome as long as you agree with the principles that it's being espoused in the Belt and Road Initiative. So that's why it is successful, and many countries are actually joining it and supporting it, and the cooperation, win-win cooperation is there. So I think that's the big difference between this IMEC, Build Back Better of the US, and other proposed, and nothing happened to it. It's like air. It's there, but it doesn't have anything.
Right, John. Of course, for the U.S., if we remember, the U.S. Relationship with China, they have a competitive one. They say they are competing with China. They are confronting China because China is rising. The U.S. is concerned about being replaced as the economic or military or in terms of technology. So there is a concern in Washington. So they are trying to do something to slow down the Chinese economic development or the Chinese growth there. But then this is also presented as something countering the Chinese, Belt and Road Initiative. What about other countries, other participating countries like Saudi Arabia, like UAE? They are not competing with China. They are working closely with China.
Right. Well, I think this is a very grandiose plan. As I said, and I'm very skeptical about its, how really this is going to be built on now. But however, having said that, I don't want to mention an existing plan in Israel. Actually, people have been talking about because I've been, staying in Israel for some time, and I'm quite familiar with the situation there. There's a plan that's been floating around for quite some time to build a railway to connect the southern port in Israel called Ashdod to the port facing the Red Sea called Eilat, to build a railway. The purpose of that is essentially to bypass the Suez Canal. Suez Canal is actually a pretty expensive waterway. The Egyptian government generates something like $8 billion a year. So this is regarded as as a competition, a competitive solution to the Suez Canal route. I think in all likelihood, that's probably more realistic than the grandiose plan of building a railway all the way through Jordan and to Saudi Arabia and to UAE. I mean, if you look at the port in UAE, the distance between UAE and Eilat in Israel, it's not that far actually. So there's no reason to build a railway to get around all these places. So I think that's probably a more realistic solution. I think that railway does benefit a lot of countries that has trade between Europe and Asia, and maybe the United States as well. But my sense is that doing something even in Israel, let alone talking about involving Jordan and Saudi Arabia, is still very difficult. I mean, this plan in Israel has been floating around for many, many years. It's not going anywhere. So we have to see what's going to happen.
There are other countries, of course, in the region not happy with this project. For example, Turkey. Turkey has expressed a different idea. They say there's a different road connecting Iraq, Turkey, and to European countries. And they say, any project should not escape the Turkey. Turkey is a big player here.
Yeah, well, Turkey is always regarded as sort of an outlier country in the European Union. I mean, not in the European Union, but in Europe in general. So I think, a project like this has a lot of geopolitical, geostrategic consideration to it, and that's for sure. So, if from that perspective, I think a project going through Turkey, I don't think the European players, Americas, would be really comfortable with such a solution. So I think that's not going to happen. I mean, Turkey is going to complain all it can, but actually has no reason to complain, maybe, because it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, the next 10 years, I don't think it's going to go anywhere at all. I mean, think about
next 10 years?
The financial and the technological and also the political, the geopolitical, the involving sovereignty issues. It's a nightmare to sort out these things. I'm just giving you one example. Going through Jordan. Jordan has a very good relationship with Egypt. What's Egypt going to do, right? It has some influence over Jordan, over Oman. I think it's going to do something, right? Egypt certainly doesn't want this to be happening. So I think there's a lot of hurdles ahead, and they signed an MOU without all the parties involved. In itself, I think, represents a big problem at the very beginning, even before it starts.
We'll speak of the hurdles, and we know that the U.S. Presidential elections are upcoming in November. And is there any possibility, people would ask for the U.S. to invest overseas in infrastructure and construction while doing very little about their domestic infrastructure, status, which is not that excellent, let's say, to say the least. So how likely is it, for the Biden government to invest in such a project while doing very little domestically?
I think that is a huge problem that the current administration of Biden is facing. And there's a lot of complaint in the United States right now that most of the resources of the current U.S. government is being extended to other things, like, for example, financing the war in Ukraine, rather than improving their infrastructure, their railway system. I think that's one of the criticism that many Americans are putting forward. If you really listen and you study the American politics at the moment, I think that will affect when you talk about the election in the coming 2024, around November. And I don't know. Well, it depends if Biden will still be the president after the election in 2024, or there will be a change of government. Because from what I know, Trump has a different perspective when you talk about more in. I think Trump is more focusing on internal dynamics, or domestic matters of America, of the United States. It's not really like willing to finance other things abroad. So if they have this IMEC, and if Trump wins, I think this will also suffer in terms of financing, because I don't think Trump would want to finance more other countries, or a project like this that he thinks that the country will not benefit more in terms of revenue. But I think if Biden, well, the problem at the end of the day with project like IMEC is more still at the end is financial consideration, because I don't think the United States can afford financing a huge project like IMEC right now, given the economic conditions that they have, given the recession that they're experiencing. And one more thing, they're still financing the Ukraine crisis, and they're releasing a lot of money, and even American people are not happy about this. So I think these are realities that the Americans and even US are facing. But still, I mean, the current government, I think, is blind to it, or they just turn a blind eye about all of these things.
Well, Professor Hussein Askary, also at the G20 summit, U.S. President Joe Biden made the proposal to expand the lending capacity of financial institutions like World Bank, again, to counter the so-called influence of the Chinese influence through BRI. What do you make of it? And I mean, of course, is there any likelihood that those financial institutions will undergo substantial reforms, for example, giving more say to rising powers like China, like India, or like Brazil or South Africa, for example?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. This is part of a new operation which was launched by the US Treasury Department last year. I call it Debt Trap 2.0. It's not the same as the old. They say China should contribute more to relieving the debt of poor and middle income nations. China should abstain from giving new loans to infrastructure projects. And those countries should not take new loans from China for building important infrastructure projects which will improve their economy. So this is the new game. They want to empower the World Bank and the IMF, who never contributed to economic development of Africa in the last 60 years. Where are the big projects that the World Bank have produced in Africa? Nothing. There's a lot of money spread all over the place, but has no effect. It's mostly political money. So this is not really going to happen. The issue, which I want to warn people, is that the question is not about trade. The Belt and Road Initiative is not a trade initiative. It's about economic development. And when President Xi Jinping talks about the economic belt of the new Silk Road, which is a land-based corridor, is about bringing development to landlocked nations and utilizing the human and natural resources of these nations to develop them and create the atmosphere where you can have better trade, better economic relations among nations. This is the core of the issue. It's not about trade. The Suez Canal will forever remain the most viable trade route. It's not about trade. If you want to have trade between Europe and India, the Suez Canal is perfect. You don't need to load and offload on railway. It will become very expensive. The best rail-based corridor between Europe and Asia is the China-EU Rail Express, which transits through Russia and Belarus. And despite the war and sanctions, the railways of Russia and Belarus were not sanctions, because this railway is the most efficient and fastest rail connection for trade between Europe and China. So when the speed increases on these corridors, then you will have alternatives. But the real issue is economic development. Now, the United States, they have all these fantasies. I mean, President Biden talked about building a trans-African railway from Angola to Tanzania on the Indian Ocean. Well, China has built that one. I don't know if President Biden has people who know about geography or economic development. China did develop the Angola-Zambia Tanzania Railway a few years ago. Sorry, you are misinformed. Your knowledge about, but the real story is economic development. And I think, and the reason we started the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden is that because we think it's beneficial for Sweden and for Europe to participate with China in building development projects all over the planet. We have technological capabilities here, which are useful for the Belt and Road. We have construction companies who are very good, but we don't have the financing. We have enormous problems here at home. Mm-hmm. The Belt and Road, joining the Belt and Road is going to save us even here and even in the United States. So as they say, if you cannot beat them, join them. This should be the slogan for the world, instead of creating these empty shell projects. Why did they change the name Build Back Better World 3, Build Back Better World, to the Global Infrastructure Partnership? Because Build Back Better America failed. President Biden's own Build Back Better America failed in the Congress, did not get enough support in Congress to build in the United States. So how come the Congress will support financing projects outside America? This is all, hot air.
That's a good point. Well, lastly, we have, of course, another stop made by President Biden in Asia. That's Vietnam. So, and of course, the two countries upgraded their relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. So probably for U.S., many people are looking at Vietnam to use this country to, to balance or counter China in this region. But for Vietnam, probably they see it differently. They want to benefit from relationship with both China and the United States. What do you make of it?
Thank you. Yeah, this is a very interesting development at the moment, especially in Southeast Asia. And as you know, I'm from the Philippines, so I'm part of. I am an ASEAN member. No, I think the decision of Vietnam to upgrade its bilateral relation with the United States to a comprehensive strategic partnership amid the great power rivalry is a well-measured move on the part of Vietnam. But this time, they are putting premium on economic considerations such as economic cooperation agreements with Vietnam and the U.S. companies, more particularly on semiconductor, tech, aviation, chip making, and artificial intelligence. So it means more business and more partnership between Vietnamese firms and U.S. firms. But I think on the part of Vietnam, when you talk about foreign policy, I think Vietnam is consistent. I don't see Vietnam, being with the United States or with the Western Alliance, joining the bandwagon or the orchestrated some kind of blocks containing China or countering China. I don't see it that way. I think Vietnamese foreign policy will be consistent, that it will pursue an independent foreign policy, prioritizing more its national interests and well-calibrated balancing act between Beijing and Washington, or between Beijing and the United States. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the United States, as far as it is concerned, I think for them, the way I see it, the way I analyze it, is that the comprehensive strategic partnership with Vietnam is a calculated move to counterbalance China, or to counter China, or to contain China. I think US sees Vietnam as a crucial in its strategy to contain Beijing, in the context of what you call Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. I think the expanded partnership reflects the broader efforts of the United States across Asia to counter China's influence, especially when you talk about trade, when you talk about economics, when you talk about politics, and even geopolitics for that matter. I think this is much more the what you call the intention I see on the part of the United States. But on the part of Vietnam, I don't see it that way. I think Vietnam is more focused on economics and how they can benefit from this kind of upgrade in right. relationship. But I think US is a little bit more geopolitics in that sense, though there is an economic component, because they're trying to look for some kind of access also to rare earth minerals for their production,
right.
Because
right.
they're kind of afraid that probably in a matter of time, China will be very self-sufficient when you talk about semiconductor issue. Because right now, when you talk about trade and you talk about issue on trade, I think the United States is imposing, or have this kind of trade war imposing many restrictions on China.
Well,
when you talk
we
about
have to stop there. And with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.